All right, we're moving right along very early. Looks like we're on to the next OSD discussion about scrub and repair. So I guess take it away, guys.
Okay, so scrub has some issues at the moment. First and foremost, I think, is that if you do a scrub and there are inconsistencies, you have to be watching the central log and know how to interpret it to actually figure out what was inconsistent. So that's the first thing we want to fix. We need an interface so that the OSD, when it scrubs a PG, tracks the inconsistencies, ideally not in memory, because there might be thousands of them in some kind of really horrible case. So I think the first step is to define all of the ways in which an object can be inconsistent. That will become the base data structure we pass around between the OSD and Liberatos, and now through the Liberatos call. Second, when the OSD encounters an inconsistent object, it describes it using this data structure, and then it sticks it into LevelDB using an architectural device like the SnapMapper. It's boring and uninteresting, but it's nice that we won't have to rewrite it. There's an existing piece of code that generically maps a key to buffer list mapping onto the backing file store, and more importantly, keeps in memory any unstable keys, so that if you read while there's an in-progress transaction, it reads out of memory instead of out of the file store. Not interesting, but at least it saves us that trouble. So we can just borrow that structure for writing up this OSD information, or the per object inconsistency information. Also important is that the inconsistency information is logically tied to an active interval. So when we go through peering or the acting set changes at all, I think it's perfectly fine to just discard this information. So the object into which we will be recording this information does not need to be a rep op. It doesn't need to be sent to the replicas, and it's fine if it gets cleared if we go through peering.
Right.
Maybe that turns into a problem when we change it later, but that's fine for now.
Yeah.
Okay, so that has some implications in the Rados interface. It means that everything we ask of the OSD, it needs to tell us what it needs to give us a epoch sequence number, so that we can compare it to our subsequent and previous requests and make sure that there wasn't a change in the acting set. So any consumers of this interface need to be aware that if this number changes, they need to reset what they're doing.
This is a new Rados. Is there a new Rados API?
Yes.
New Rados calls to query.
So first, there's one that queries the monitors. We need to find out which PGs are actually inconsistent. I don't think there's a Liberatos PG dump, and nor should there be. So at the moment, it will query inconsistent PGs, and it'll page. So you'll get a certain number of PGs at a time until we provide it with the last one you're about to get the next set.
Sorry, and then you'd ask the PG to enumerate problematic objects, and then ask PG about a specific bad object, I assume.
Sorry? The inconsistent info T will have all of the information pertaining to an object's inconsistency. Designing that's going to be important. Anything we leave out of that structure will be information we don't propagate to Liberatos, so we need to try not to miss anything.
Okay.
Then we need a repair inconsistent object. This is where the activation epoch is pretty important, because the detail, how we identify the replica, is pretty important to which epoch we got the information from. So the OSD needs to be able to say, actually, you need to re-query that object because you have fail information. Make sense?
Don't we also need something before that actually lets you read the individual replicas?
Yeah, so that's down here. I haven't decided how to do that yet.
This is in the blueprint.
It's in the blueprint. It's a little further down. This is a discussion I want to have.
Okay.
I don't want to reproduce all of the current interfaces. So we need to be able to get the object payload in all of the ways you can currently do that. You need to be able to get the X-adders. You need to be able to get the OMAP, but we don't want to have like an inconsistent object version of all of those. So
yeah.
Is this a global property you set on the IO context? Is this another version of submit? Or, sorry, of what's it called? Operate. Is this another version of AIO operate that only takes Liberatos read operation? That might make sense, actually.
I think it would make most sense to put it in the object locator.
Really?
Well, wait a sec.
No,
No.
the object locator is
No, no, no.
logically part of the identifier
Yeah.
for an object. That's no good.
Yeah, well, it's part of the IO context though. So that
I've never been a big fan of the stateful APIs on the IO context.
yeah.
Yeah, I kind of prefer the adding it as a new AIO operate
Yeah,
method.
okay.
That's my
So
instinct.
I guess
Operate method.
that's as general as possible because it can take any kind of
Right.
Read operation.
operation. Yeah. Okay.
Something
Actually,
that
we
comes
can
with that is that
restrict it to specifically read operations, which I like too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
From there,
we
I
could
think
expose that
it's
interface
co-op
through Python
existing.
sometime too.
Huh? What's that?
As I was saying, it'd be good to expose that whole AIO or operator interface through Python or other languages as well.
Yeah.
We have kind of
Oh,
like
and
two
safe.
sides for C, but making sure we get these new interfaces in C as well would be pretty good.
Okay, so don't be lazy when we create the interfaces. Fine. Sage, we previously talked a bit about I felt strongly that we should proxy it through the primary. I no longer feel that, so I think we'll just co-opt the existing path. What I really didn't want to do is have a stateful thing that the object where the object just sort of magically redirects it somewhere else for some reason.
Yeah.
So as long as
But if it's on a separate call,
which OSD we're talking to, yeah.
per request thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I like that better. I wonder if that should also have a thing that's like that sort of asserts that it's a given interval, and if it's not, then their request just like returns.
Exactly. We have to do that. That's part of this operate interface. You'll specify something out of the structure you got out of the inconsistent info T, probably just the OSD ID, and you'll also specify the PG epoch, and the replica will use that to verify that we're in the correct interval.
Okay, so in the case of it's a specific replica, it seems like you'd want to say like rank 0, 1, or 2.
I think you get that. Libredos is going to give you back a printable but otherwise not interpretable ID, which is going to happen to be the integer OSD ID. I don't think it should be the rank. This way, users can actually. Huh?
What happens if the acting set changes?
That's the point. The result of when you query the inconsistent information for the object will also give you back the PG epoch, identifying that interval. So probably the first epoch from that interval. You will then provide that back to this special operate call, which the replica can then use it to verify that it's supposed to satisfy the request.
I mean, if you do that, then it doesn't matter which.
Requery the PG until you get so you have to keep querying the PG until you get until you can read the object at the same epoch at which you queried it.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I mean, at that point, you know that you're in the correct interval, so it doesn't matter whether it's the OSD ID or the other rank. It's just.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, but OSD ID is easier because they can print it, and if we tell them that it's the OSD ID, they can match it up to the PG dump thing.
Right. So I guess the other question, and then they can go look on the actual host and whatever with less work. So I guess the other thing though is that makes perfect sense for replicas. What's the analogous situation here for erasure coding?
Right.
So that's a whole different thing. Erasure coding, you will never get into a situation where you don't know which replica is wrong.
Because they have a checksum locally.
Yeah. So that's another thing. Some of this will be applicable to erasure coded PG, some of it won't.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, you can't read from replica on erasure coded PG, so that's easy.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best you can do is simply say, "I want you to repair this object."
Yeah. Well, I mean, do we have to worry about the situation where the CRC is defeated?
Defeated?
Or like a stripe doesn't decode, but the CRC is correct. Like it's not a cryptographically secure one-way hash. Even if it were, then.
I think if. No, I don't think we should worry about that.
Not yet.
So no, I mean I think either it decodes and it's repairable, or it deletes the object. So the locator T you get back Can we do that?
We had a question
What?
coming in
Okay,
from
so
back
yeah,
on
if it fails to decode, if it fails to repair, oh, and this repair thing needs to be asynchronous, I think, so you can get an error code. If it fails to repair, you'll get back an error code, and if you re-query that object, you'll get the inconsistent info T will say, not only do these shards not match, I actually can't repair it. And
I'm
then
just thinking that
repair.
I'm just thinking that
Oh, go ahead.
you might have a situation where all the CRCs look okay, like you have all the shards, they appear fine, but it fails to decode. And in that case, you will want to ask it to decode by excluding each shard in turn to see if one of them, for example, was written with the bad CRC that happened to match. Something like that, right?
That's okay. So yeah, we can say. Well, okay. So for replicated PGs, you'll be able to specify the replica you want to use to repair. Maybe instead of specifying the replica used to repair, we'll specify correct replicas.
Yeah, like a list. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's more general because then it would then you can for the Ursha code, I think you could exclude N of the M or whatever.
Did you guys see the question in IRC from Beckham? I had a question about with replicated pools with size of greater than 2, a scrub detecting consistent objects could automatically heal by quorum.
Yeah, so that's another thing we can do. That'll be the next thing.
Yep.
So could that just be implemented in the Ceph command using this interface?
Yes, but arguably you might have a pool where you just want to set this as a policy.
Yeah.
Like auto repair.
Yeah.
I mean, it's never perfectly safe because you could have a like a rebalancing event that just propagates the error to 2 replicas instead of 1.
Right.
And you but so it's not probably better.
I think it's probably pool property is what it is. This would be a thing we start to extend the pool structure with, and yeah.
Okay. All right. So there's an AIO operate that takes extra arguments to read from a specific replica. Int. This is actually a list, replica or shards to read with. And then there'd also be an AIO. Would it also be an AIO operate for repair?
I think so. Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean.
It's the same thing where we add because that goes to the primary actually, but we have.
Yeah, it does, and arguably we can make it a right too.
So it's really just it'll just be a Rados operate that's called repair essentially. Rados operation called repair.
Well, I mean, it doesn't really behave that much like a Rados operation, though. That's the concern.
Well,
it doesn't event. It doesn't. It takes locks, but not really the same way.
Okay, so we should have a separate Rados called in for it, I guess is the question.
Yeah, we'll have to think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
I mean, we have a class of Rados operations that aren't reads or writes that we added the cache ones.
Yeah,
they're sort of meta operations. It's not those obviously, but it's similarly different, I guess.
Like, I mean, what happens if you have a transaction containing an evict and a write, or things of this nature?
Yeah, I mean, right now that just doesn't really behave, I think.
That's why I'm trying to be cautious about putting more things in the web interface.
Yep.
If they don't act like writes, maybe they shouldn't be writes. Or maybe they shouldn't be Rados operation.
Well, so if there's a repair, does that mean that we should also have a scrub? Like you could just send a thing that says scrub this object?
Ideally, I would restructure all scrub that way, but we have to remain backwards compatible, so it's probably not worth it.
Backwards compatible with what? I mean,
well, okay, so if we're going to do that, then ideally scrub itself would use that interface to perform the per object scrubs, right? But we definitely can't do that, at least not without an enormous amount of pain.
Because
they don't act anything like a Rados operation right now. There's locking machinery which then waits on the log and then it's sent a separate special message type. Maybe we could emulate it using a chunket size 1.
Yeah, it's also chunky. Right, exactly. Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay.
Another question on IRC.
So you want to extend the Ceph CLI or Radar CLI to be able to fetch all replicas for an object from LPGs?
Yes, that
Basically,
would be something we
yes.
could do with the design.
Yes. Right.
We're talking at the Librados level because that's just sort of the easy for me to think of. But yeah.
So we'd add like a Rados command line tool command that'd be like get all replicas of object, and it could write out this object, sort of, except that OMAP is all different and whatever. Yeah.
Rados dump inconsistent information for object, which will just dump a JSON description of what's going on, and then a different command that then pulls each object in turn and names it that way or whatever.
Yep. Okay. Yes.
Do you have other questions for scrub and repair?
All objects are currently, Scrub works its way one chunk at a time through the PG, and I think we'll maintain that concept because it's far more efficient than using some kind of per object Rados command. I guess in a way it's a sample of them because you do scrub one PG at a time. Totally out of focus.
Yeah. So can we talk about? All right. So this is the Rados level.
What about the internal OSD metadata stuff that might be inconsistent?
Yeah, so that's
not visible to Rados users.
Well, okay, so that will be included in the inconsistent. You mean the size?
Or maybe the snapshots that exist, or yeah, exactly.
Those the snap mapper already fixes it itself. The object info is authoritative. The snap mapper is merely a secondary index, so it doesn't even wait for a repair. It just fixes it itself. Currently, it emits a central log warning. So.
So what about the object info then?
So that's a little trickier. First off, we can't fix that without a write. So that's actually a pretty good reason to make repair a write rather than just a recovery operation. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. It might be something like
a write in the sense that the version changes.
Yeah, because we may need to actually update the object info to something that isn't on any of the objects. So it would be something like the write operation would contain the information required to update the metadata, and then as a side effect, it will pick out certain objects, which it will then mark as missing and initiate a repair or a recovery. When both the recovery and the write are complete, it would then act the. This would dovetail slightly with the being able to pour writes to non-degraded objects or to degraded objects. So you perform the write as though it were degraded, and then repair.
It seems like the recovery approach is simpler, though.
Right. It's just you can't repair. Well, okay, maybe you can, but it's weirder to repair object info errors that way. For example, if there's a size mismatch, you're really creating a new object that really can't have been the one that existed before. So if for example another replica shows up that happened to also have the corrupted info, it'll still be.
I see. Right. Yeah. So if all replicas have the wrong object info size, and all you want to do is rewrite the object info, you don't need to recover the object. I guess you just need to.
Well, better yet, if the one who uses authoritative happens to have this problem, then they're orthogonal, right?
Yeah.
You correct that, and then also repair the ones that don't match.
Yeah. Yeah, it just makes me nervous to actually be changing it in order to repair it.
Maybe they're just logically distinct operations, and we should keep them that way. Or maybe we just truncate the object to the size and call it good.
Yeah.
Maybe, okay, so maybe
much work-
repair existed object and repair object metadata are separate operations. One in you first repair the inconsistent object, then you repair its metadata, perhaps. The latter would be right.
Would that just be an operation that actually repairs the metadata on all copies?
Well, okay, so it would assume that before you've done that, the objects are consistently wrong. So it would be a write that updates the object info. Or the object, whatever, either way. I guess I'm looking for a more sort of consistent way of approaching it. Because there are a lot of thorny edge cases possible, depending on how we choose to go. So I'd like it to match as closely as possible the way the internal structures work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, I mean, and generally speaking, yes. I guess that's, yeah. That's why I wouldn't want to turn it into a write that goes through all the other write machinery if that isn't actually what you want to do. But probably just
the metadata update
actually doing it. Yeah. I mean, in sort of the weirder case, you could imagine you had 3 replicas. The object size is wrong on all of them, but one of the on-disk files actually is big enough, but like has the data, but the object info is wrong. And so you want to be able to read. You want to read that extra data or whatever from that one replica and update all the metadata to match and recover it to the other, whatever. It's sort of.
Yeah, so I think you start by blessing that one as the correct one and performing a repair recovery.
And metadata. And adjust the metadata at the same time.
Huh?
And adjust the metadata at the same time because you need to adjust the object size.
So how through this interface, how would you be able to tell that the objects on disk was larger than the object had recorded?
I don't know. That's
well, actually, I'm suggesting that you would actually first heal the replicas so that they're all the same, and then perform an update that is actually a write that changes the object info to match.
Yep, as long as the healing part doesn't respect the metadata, like the object info size.
It would act like a regular recovery.
But I think a regular recovery assumes that the object info size is correct.
Yeah,
but whatever.
That means that we sort of need to make a decision that the object size is authoritative, and during recovery, if it turns out that the object info size is wrong, we just roll with it.
I mean, you could do it the other way. You just heal the object info size first on all of them.
Yeah.
And then do a recovery. Yeah, it's simpler. Okay.
But so I think there are some cases where you might want to be able to tell like what the size of the actual data on disk is versus what the object info says, right?
I think you can do that by performing a stat on. No, you can't. Never mind. Let's get you back out.
No, I think scrub is the only thing that validates that.
Yeah. So if that's inconsistent, maybe you want to expose a separate operation that tells us things about what the object actually looks like in the back end versus what the object info says.
Well, that's what the inconsistent info T would be, right? The per object.
Yeah, I guess that would be in there. Yeah.
Yeah, we can easily just add the real size versus the metadata size for each object. That's
yeah.
I do think we should also have a delete inconsistent object. In many situations, that will be acceptable, and then you've solved your problem. So that will be useful as a get out of jail with some expense card. Or I guess that would just be delete. I guess when we delete it, you don't need a special call for that.
Mhm.
Also, while we're here, it would be cool if you could enumerate your unfound objects and declare them. If you could also have a Liberatos interface to fix that also, basically.
I mean, there is a, right, that's all through the PG-tel interface right now, right? What's
Right.
missing? Yeah.
Also, you can't tell to mark a specific object unfound, and you can't get any information about it. This inconsistent info T will probably suffice to give you exactly the information about an unfound object that you want. That starts to sound a lot like being able to scrub a single object, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing that makes me nervous here is that if by sort of enshrining this in the Rados API, it is sort of fixing it.
Yeah.
In some sense.
So,
whereas the sort of sideband PG-tel stuff, you can do all the same stuff, but it's easier to change it over time.
I think that difference is great. I think if people depend on the tel interface, it's just as fixed. It's possible that fixing this in the Liberatos interface is actually an advantage because it separates the details of how a scrub happened to occur from how we choose to think about.
But the contents of the inconsistent info T are going to change. I think that's the thing. And if the
we could make it a more general
PG-tel
structure that's extendable. Like it could have it just be a simple map of like key value parrot strings.
Right. I mean, it's generally going to be the admin that's actually doing this, right?
Right. Although not necessarily. This could be Calamari.
Or like a script or something.
So yeah, actually, I'm sorry I missed part of the conversation, but I'd like to hear more about how we expect admins to actually use this. Because I mean, when they come in board and what they want to repair, what they're usually saying is, I have 3 copies and one of them's wrong. I want you to just pick the one that's obviously right from the, because there's 2 versions of it instead of 1.
Yeah. So the interface we've described so far lends itself naturally to being put into the Rados tool. So that part would be handled. You do something like, okay, which objects are inconsistent? This object, how is it inconsistent? Oh, obviously copy 2 is correct. Repair using copy 2, right?
Like repair auto, or repair like with copy 2 something.
Well, no, I mean,
who would make that determination?
Well, in
Obviously,
the case you just laid out, the admin says 1 is obviously correct. Do you mean the admin looks at the on-disk structures and says, oh, this one's probably right, based on its 4 megabytes instead of half a megabyte? Or do you mean that there are 2 instead of 1 and that the OSD should just make the call?
That one. Just
okay, then yes.
That's what people are usually asking for.
We briefly discussed a thing where we had a pool property that's like an auto repair policy. That could be an option.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe they want to do that, but I think in general, and probably the default behavior would be that it would just flag it, and then they would have to go, the admin would go inspect it. So they'd have a command like that's get scrub result, right? Well, it'd be like rados-pp list scrub errors, and then for a specific object, get scrub result.
Something like that. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Right, but I mean, in many cases, the admins aren't going to have the information they need to know which of them is actually right. So it's just going to be a manual inspection of each of 3 copies of 1,000 objects in a PG or whatever.
Right. Or
okay, so they can also
so they could do that.
Auto for each one, right? In a for loop.
Okay.
Yeah, and if they don't want to do that, then they can call the repair auto thing that'll just do a vote or whatever. It'll pick one.
Yeah.
Vote or something.
Well, the reason I ask about it now is that I'm not sure that we actually need to expose this through Liberatos. It could just be that, you know, like our internal tools are using this, but it's just a single.
So I mean,
I honestly don't care if there's only one tool who uses it. We should still put it through Liberatos.
All right. I guess what I'm wondering is this that different than Ceph PG 1.2 list scrub errors? Ceph PG 1.2 get scrub result object, right?
I mean, yeah, it could be plumbed through that way. It's not clear that there's a disadvantage to doing it through Rados, though. It seems simpler. Particularly, I mean, I'm not sure about the repair part. It might be simpler not to use Rados for that. But getting the scrub
Yeah.
repaired, that seems like it seems exactly like PGLS, in fact.
Yeah. Well, I think that the thing that worries me is this inconsistent object info T. Right? All
Would you
these
rather
results
use
are
string and be uninterpreted JSON?
yeah.
Because whatever you choose to output to the user, it's going to be structured in some way. Either
and
it's
it has to be
JSON,
something they can type back.
or it's just text and it's still structured because they're going to grab it.
Yeah. So I mean, the unfound stuff right now that's through the PGTel interface is JSON, and it's annoying. Like
And
all the
it's hard to
parsing
read.
and putting, yeah, it's annoying. So I agree there. But it's at least it's not that hard to wire up.
The API to be a fixed structure. It could still be a generic structure without being JSON.
I actually don't know that having it be a real structure is that big a deal. It just means the decode method will ignore fields that it doesn't know about.
Well, it means it's like that many more functions you have to implement in the Rados tool. That's in like interpreting and printing and parsing and all that. Whereas if it's like the tell thing, the nice thing about the JSON is it's just whatever. You can output anything because everything is a dump function, and you can parse, anything that you add a parser for, which we've done with all the RGW stuff. It's not that hard. And it's all implemented OSD side. Like there's no special tool needed. It's just a generic Ceph CLI tool. In fact, it's not even PG. What if it is like tell 1.2, right? Like the main thing is that you have to you're talking to a specific PG, so it's like one more step. The user is interacting with
Okay, so
PG instead of a pool.
How does it handle it if you do a repair on an object that's currently being written?
Right.
Or a read on an object that's currently being written.
Well, it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same set of checks that are in there's similar checks that are in the current do-op thing, but I'm worried that the do-op stuff isn't going to necessarily match either because it thinks about reads versus writes, and this is sort of neither. It's like I think either way you're going to have. Or say it's a missing object and this is like a read, and you want to tell it to do something about the unfound or something, right? Then you don't want to do that check. Like I'm not sure that the current set of checks are going to be right either. Although I guess it's the same code, I guess, so at least you're in the same path.
Well, in that case, you might actually be
check. I mean, same thing with cache, where they changed that code to work with the cache operations as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was.
If you want to expose this through Liberatos, I think we have to modify that same code.
Sorry, say it again about the cache objects.
I think if we expose these operations through Liberatos, we have to modify that same do-op code. Otherwise.
Yeah. Well, we did that. We did that for the cache ops, right?
It just happened not
exactly.
to catch the right stuff.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty good argument against what I'm saying, actually. I'm just extremely leery of adding things to the PGTel interface because it doesn't respect any of the other locking in the OSD. It tends to be more brittle compared to the other things in the OSD.
Mm-hmm.
Being JSON based, it's less structured. So this is an API, and Calamari will depend on it at some point in the future.
Yeah, but yeah. I mean, it's both less structured and it is less structured. But we can define whatever structure we want, right? If we just say that it's it outputs JSON and these arguments are specified of this type in JSON, so it'll just parse it. Like I'll parse the H object T.
It's just that it's not different really than using the Libretto's call that handles the encode decode for you.
Except it's like hundreds and hundreds of lines of boilerplate crap that's in the Rados CLI tool they have to implement, and in the Librettos API, and in like it's so much. I mean, I'm a little bit lazy here, but it's like so much less work. I'm not sure that it's that other stuff is buying us that much, because we have to plumb it through Objector, and then Librettos, and then the Rados tool, and we have to format it, and then we and then we have to parse the arguments. Yeah. Whereas the tell stuff will literally only hit, OSD.cc and pg.cc and whatever, right? We use the question, you would still need to get a hold of all the object replicas. You don't want those to be returned as JSON. I mean, you'd still have a thing that lists all the problematic objects for a PG. So like your health will say that PG 1.2 has errors. You'll say Ceph tell 1.2 list scrub error objects or whatever, and it'll give you a JSON array of all the object stuff in JSON.
I mean, you have to page it, so I'll have to add paging to that part.
Pagination, is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not different. This is another thing we have to do there.
Yeah. I think the unfound thing already does that. Or list missing did that. I better remove that actually, but whatever. Yeah, still do that. And then when you have a particular object, you would say, get scrub result or whatever for that object. To be like, name, whatever it is. I think that the only real thing that like makes me hesitate is that JSON is so annoying to type on the command line.
Well, and if the acting set changes while you're doing the tell, you get a much more complicated possible set of outcomes, whereas if you do it through Librettos, the messages will be epicked. You will go to the current primary, and it will probably just tell you key again, right? Whereas the Ceph
you can do that. You just make it an argument. List scrub errors with the starting interval.
Well, yeah, that part's true, but it may not go to the new primary, right?
I see. Yeah.
Everything's.
I mean, you can make a tell force interval, or like check interval 1, 2, 3, 4, and then on the client side, it would verify that it's sending it to that thing. I mean, it's the same check that the Rados call would be doing, basically, right? Except you're making it a generic thing that tell would do.
Oh, okay.
And the get scrub result would give you back this big thing that's like, replicas, add replicas, I don't know, whatever. I don't know, some structured thing that tells you all about what's going on. You still need the, I guess you still want to be able, in order to read the bad objects, you still need to do.
That has to be in Rados.
Force replica, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, or whatever. Check interval. 1, 2, 3.
I also worry that the chore of plumbing the stuff through the objector and the Rados tool is causing us to pour more stuff into tell than perhaps we should be. If the problem is that we actually shouldn't have any objector users and NDS should go straight through Librettos and they should be the same interface rather than having to bounce through the objector through the Librettos interface.
Yeah. So that much is true. But even so, just the fact that you have to add support for this in the Rados CLI tool. And the nice thing about tell is that it's an out-of-band administrative interface that is, intentionally more flexible. Like, sure, you can have structured things in there, obviously, that you don't want to, like this sort of thing that if there are consumers of it, you wouldn't want to change it, but you could add stuff to it. Like you can add extra random stuff to that JSON dump when you learn new things that the client may or may not understand.
So right now is the tel interface going through the new Libredo's like PG command?
Yep. Yeah, I actually can't remember if we made the tel PGID thing work, but that's the idea, right? It's the same Ceph PG and then PGID or Ceph tel, whatever. You're telling a specific PGID,
Right.
an out-of-band admin type command.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it was actually wired up in Libredos already.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I can double check, but yeah, there's in Libredos.h, there is there's a mon command, Rados mon whatever, and then there's a Rados OSD command, and there's a Rados PG command. Then you give it the PGID, and it sends it to that PG.
Right.
I think what we would need to add here is an extra argument that adds the interval check, basically. Which we could sort of a generic client-side thing that would then apply to all these different commands.
So how are we doing on this topic?
The horse is almost dead.
Yeah,
but we have.
I suspect that when we start working on it, one or the other will become obviously better. So I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, yeah. I guess. I think the key is to get the plumbing stuff in the OSD to sort of do this, and also the stuff that obviously needs to go in the object, or like being able to read from particular replicas.
Yeah.
And the OSD tracking that metadata, and then at the point at which it comes time to expose it, we'll have hopefully more insight.
And certainly tell us.
We can iterate on that a little bit.
There's no reason to not have it, at least for exposing the objects that are inconsistent, followed by their inconsistency information. So once we have the internal OSD machinery, there's no reason not to expose it through a tel anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I guess. Sorry. The last thing is if it is a tel thing, then the input arguments are also unstructured, so you can add additional arguments after the fact. Whereas if it's part of Libredos, then you literally have to like revise Libredos to add new arguments to new functions to.
Right, which again feels to me like a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We can move on.
All right. I think actually this is probably a good time to take a short 15-minute break. I didn't build a break into the afternoon, but it is getting a little long in the tooth here.
Yeah.
So we'll take about 15 minutes, and that'll bring us right back on schedule, and we'll pick up with a little bit more OSD stuff and talk about locally repairable codes and go from there. So we'll see everybody back here in about 15.
Sounds good.